terms of Donald Trump, he's a malignant narcissist, you say. You also say that he's suffering from some level of dementia, and you gave us some incredible examples, one of which triggered all sorts of people. And this was when he was saying, and I'm going to read it, I'm quoting you here, he was saying that they're going to send all these immigrants from insane asylums, and then he goes, anyone seen Silence of the Lambs? And then he goes, the late, great Hannibal Lecter. Nobody likes to talk about him anymore. And everybody remembered that exchange, and your explanation of it being a symptom of dementia was very helpful. Can you re-explain that for people who didn't hear it the first time?
Sure. So it's a chain of loose associations, right? So he's telling a lie. He's saying that all these immigrants are coming from insane asylums. Okay, so that's the malignant narcissism. He's just lying. But then thinking about an insane asylum reminds him, oh, I saw a movie about insane asylums. Okay, and then that makes him remember the main character from the movie. And that makes him think, hey, whatever happened to that guy? No one ever talks about him anymore. So we're seeing like a stone skipping along the water. He's going from one association to another, but it doesn't make any linear sense. So saying, hey, nobody ever talks about the late, great Hannibal Lecter. Well, first of all, he's a fictional character, so he can't be dead. But how did you get there from immigrants coming from insane asylums? Because he had this loose chain of associations.
And is it a loose chain because it sounds like something? Because one of the other symptoms you noticed was that people who are beginning to suffer dementia can't often say the whole word, so they go crash instead of Christmas. That was an example you gave us.
Yes, it's called phonemic paraphasias. They can't complete the word properly, so they just kind of add a nonsense ending. So you can't say Christmas, you say Christus, or missiles, missus.
Right.
And there are dozens and dozens of examples of that. And they're on social media almost like as kind of supercuts of like things to make fun of him or to be humorous. But they're actually very serious signs, very serious and well-known medical signs of dementia. People don't make those kinds of phonemic paraphasias if they're tired or if they're aging. That's just not something they do. It's something very specific that is linked to dementia and organic cognitive decline. And actually, in terms of this sort of sounds like, I think I might have mentioned last time that, someone asked him a question about Harvard, and then he went on to talk about Harlem, and it wasn't just that he misunderstood the word, because then he goes back and circles back and says, and the people in Harvard and Harlem, they really approve of what we're doing at Harvard. So what they had in common is they begin with H. Other than that, I think we would agree that Harlem and Harvard are very different places.
So we've seen a lot of Donald Trump on the world stage and many stages. I mean, he gives endless press conferences. We simply can't complain that we don't see enough of him. You also referenced sometimes people with dementia have phases of great grandiosity, and one couldn't help thinking last week when he was claiming peace in the Middle East. They said it couldn't be done. It's taken 3,000 years, but here I am. That was far from being modest, which a lot of actual peacemakers are. He put himself center stage. And unfortunately, we've already seen a slight outbreaking of fighting over the weekend. And I think a more sort of modest person might have thought this might take some time. You can't, just because you say it doesn't mean it's going to happen.
Well, the grandiosity is certainly part of his personality disorder. These things interact, so it's easy to kind of, in real life, they get confused or they interact with each other. But his cognitive decline is a physiological thing that's been deteriorating now over a number of years. His personality disorder is who he is and who he's always been, although that also gets worse over time. Eric Fromm said that people with malignant narcissism tend to get worse because with any degree of success, their grandiosity becomes inflamed, their paranoia becomes inflamed, their sense that I can do no wrong becomes disinhibited, their violence against others becomes disinhibited, both because they feel they can do anything they want and because they're becoming increasingly grandiose and paranoid. And the other thing is, though, when we see people with dementia, whatever personality disorder they have tends to get dramatically worse, more disinhibited, more sort of grossly raw, more primitive. I think we're seeing that with him, too. So what we're really seeing is he has the worst personality disorder a human being can have, have. But now, as he cognitively deteriorates, he expresses it in ways that are more impulsive, more coarse, more disorganized. We'll talk maybe about some of his AI videos.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you about that. When you said, they become more coarse and disinhibited. I mean, yesterday he released an AI video of him flying a plane over Times Square and then it opening a whole ton of sewage and dropping on the people below. That seems something that a 9-year-old boy is more likely to do, not the leader of the free world.
Right, exactly. So it shows that kind of disinhibited, it's the real him. I know there's a lot of controversy about the PP tape. One of the things that or the alleged PP tape, one of the things I've always said about it is whether or not it's true, it's certainly in character. Because someone with malignant narcissism wants to defile and degrade other people. They get immense sexual pleasure out of it. They're sadists. What's one of the components of malignant narcissism? It's narcissism, paranoia, antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy, and sadism, those 4 components. So the idea that he really just wants to shit on everyone who disagrees with him, that's like literally how he feels because of the personality disorder. The other thing, though, about his recent talks is we talked about his confusing Harvard and Harlem. Recently, he's been confusing India and Iran. He's been talking about Pakistan being at war with Iran, and he's trying to broker a peace. And he says Iran several times when he's talking about India.
As an example, if you look at Pakistan and Iran, I told them I was in the midst of negotiating a trade deal with Iran, and Pakistan was going to be in line.
Well, Chris, what do those 2 countries have in common? They begin with I. That's
right.
Sort of like Harvard and Harlem. So that's the level of free association we're talking about.
And is that just because he's the president and he's got a lot of details to keep on top of? I mean, I agree that getting India and Iran confused is potentially a deadly mistake. But is there any benefit of the doubt you could give him that he's, trying to master a ton of detail here?
Well, look, as an older person, I tend to give people a lot of benefit of the doubt. I mean, even on my own podcast, sometimes I say, oh, yeah, the person from Germany, what's his name? Then we have to edit that out. But he tends to mishmash them together in a way that shows a deeper level of thought disorder. For example, the other thing he was saying about India and Pakistan is he's saying, well, I think he's starting to say India now. He's saying, well, India's had a lot of change of leadership. They haven't really been stable. That's true of Pakistan. It's not true of India. So first he confuses their names, then he confuses the countries themselves, their political leadership and their history. So it's one thing to get a name wrong, maybe even to reverse it, although that still seems very rare, but he's actually confusing the countries themselves. Another example of this kind of really clearly demented memory loss would be when he was negotiating the government shutdown. He met with Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, right, the minority leader of the House and the Senate, and he said, "Yeah, I had a talk with Chuck Schumer, and he brought a very nice man with him who I didn't know."
He didn't know Hakeem Jeffries?
Yeah, he knows Hakeem Jeffries. Okay, he's not an obscure congressman. He's the minority leader. He deals with him on an almost daily basis. This is like when you go to visit your mother in the nursing home and you bring your sister and she goes, "Who's that nice lady that you brought with you?" "Oh, honey, that's your daughter. That's my sister."
Wow.
It's that level of non-recognition that we're talking about.
And if you're dealing with someone like this, if you're J.D. Vance or you're a cabinet member, how is the best, or what is the best way to deal with someone like this?
The 25th Amendment.
All right. Well, let's assume they're not going to invoke the 25th Amendment, perhaps because they're too frightened to. Actually, what are the other ways that you try to mitigate this behavior?
Well, I suspect I've heard that people don't want to be hanging around the Oval Office, that he's so cantankerous and confused and irascible that it's actually very unpleasant to be with him. And so I think what they're trying to do is sort of mollify him while the Stephen Millers and the Russell Vaught's, are dismantling the government and, attacking minorities and destroying our Constitution. He's all in favor of that, but he doesn't have the cognitive capacity to do that. He's delegated that to other people, and now they sort of have him, designing the ballroom, putting up pictures along the walk near the Rose Garden. He's very obsessed with appearances, talking about the gold leaf that he's painting on the office. Later, I'm going to read you his description about the very fine paper that they use, to send promotions to generals that he talked about at length at Quantico. So I think they just kind of keeping him busy with small hateful tasks while, the blitzkrieg is going on around him.
So Michael Wolff, one of our regular contributors and my co-host of Inside Trump's Head, talks about how Donald Trump won't shut up, that whenever you talk to him, he just talks. And indeed, we heard that he just had a 2-hour conversation with Putin, and what appeared to come out of that was that Putin said nothing and Donald Trump just talked and talked and talked. And that if you go past the Oval Office, he's in there just talking to people, that we know he loves giving press conferences. Joe Biden would rather be in the fetal position, hiding on the floor, than give a press conference. I think he gave 6 in his last couple of years, whereas Trump wants to give sort of a 2-hour press conference every day. There is nothing he likes more than the sound of his own voice. Is that also a sign of, what is it a sign of?
Well, it's a sign of his malignant narcissism, right? He's a narcissist. He thinks everything he has to say is brilliant and wonderful, even if it is a complete, cognitive train wreck, right? But he thinks everything that emanates from him is wonderful. At one point in the Quantico, he was talking about how wonderful his signature is. Everyone loves his signature. And so he goes on and on and on. And this is where the press is really not being honest with us, right? They will quote a snippet of it. And some of it's the limitations of these short broadcasts, but they'll quote a snippet of it. Sometimes it's a very provocative snippet where he's threatening to do something illegal or unconstitutional. But what they're not capturing is the meandering, illogical, sort of thought-disordered quality of his mentation that you do hear when he goes on and on for an hour. He just has all of these diatribes, all of these really sort of irrelevant, non sequitur, side conversations where he just basically has free associations talking about whatever he wants to talk about because he thinks he's so wonderful. Anything he talks about is wonderful.
And he calls it his weave, right?
Right. Well, the weave was a brilliant way to cover up his dementia because at some level he knows his thoughts are completely fragmented, that he can't follow a train of thought to save his life. So then what he does, because he's so narcissistic, is, well, that just shows what a genius I am. The fact that I can't actually complete a thought just shows how smart I am because I'm so brilliant that I can just weave all of these disparate ideas into some new creation. But it's not a manifestation of genius or creativity. It's a manifestation of pathology and cognitive decline.